Alrighty, y'all. We're here today with Clint Bruce, a dear friend of mine, mentor, was a mentor and coach to Matt, my brother, a former Navy SEAL, former NFL athlete, former athlete at the Naval Academy, turned into entrepreneur, and also just a lifelong server, a man that helps others, connects other people. So, Clint, thank you so much, man,
Yeah,
for being in here
it's
today.
kind of this Forrest Gumpian kind of life. You just kind of stumble around and try to fail forwards, fall upwards, right? That kind of thing. And now it's funny when you're sitting there describing my background. I'm like, man, people only knew if people only knew like the absence of talent behind all that, like just
Also,
you know,
a very humble gentleman in Clint
well,
Bruce.
I'm just honest, man, and the truth is there's more grind than gift in those things, and that should be encouraging to a lot of people. Is I think I jokingly tell people that I'm an achieving average. I'm not an average achiever, and when I say I'm an achieving average, what I mean is if you were to aggregate all my gifts and abilities, you'd find me to be a high C or low B in just about everything except for looks. I mean, I'm a good looking guy. There's no reason to not acknowledge that.
Fair enough.
I just I was leaving for work today and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I looked at my bride of 24 years and I said, "Hey, babe, I can turn it down, but I can't turn it off." And she just, it's a burden. It is, and no, but I mean, the reality is the mountain makes all men and women average if you're aiming high enough. And if you don't start any great thing with angles, allies, and advantages, then you're only going to go as far as one person can go, right?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I think playing football at the Naval Academy and certainly service reinforced me. And it's something that Matt had in spades, and it's something I watched in you. I mean, I've known who you were since you were what in fourth grade.
Yep. Fourth grade.
That's when I started talking to Matt and your family. So no, it's a painful privilege and pleasure to be here talking about this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And no better man. I've been excited for this podcast for a long time. So, Clint, yeah, you mentioned you've known me for forever and knew my
Yeah,
brother. Why don't you go into a little bit of what you remember about Matt Brewer, the man that he was, your first
yeah,
impressions and some memories of him.
yeah. Every once in a while, Annapolis will ask me to visit with someone that they're looking at, not to talk about football, but to really talk about service, really talk about life after football and what the academy experience is like. And Matt was one of those guys. Met Todd and then Matt and got to visit with him. And when I remember the first time I got on the phone with Matt, I was like, oh, this is just a linebacker, man. Just like those people that you can just tell are like uncomfortable talking on the phone. Like
Oh yeah.
they don't. It's not that they don't have words; they just would rather work, right? And so there was this kind of singularity of purpose. There was this carnivorous capacity that the whole time I was talking to him, I was like, yeah, this is straight linebacker, straight warrior. And and part of what I told him was like, hey man, when you have the kind of ethos and the mentality and the mindset you have, you got to be around people who get what you don't know how to say, right? And I tell people all the time, I was like, I got to be around people who get what I don't know how to say until I figure it out, or until I don't have to say it because they kind of get it. And just explain to him that that's kind of what the place was, what the brotherhood was like, and then obviously watching him there and watching him play there, and just him being every bit the football player that I thought he was going to be, hyper focused, hyper intentional, caring deeply for his teammates, caring about the mission. Matt was one of those guys that probably one of the greatest compliments I ever got is like they say Clint would play football at midnight in a parking lot with nobody watching,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I felt about the game. And Matt certainly was like that as well. And then obviously watching you grow up through relationship with your family, and Matt as he went in the Marine Corps and some of those other things. So yeah, it's a double edged gift playing in a service academy because the reality of our profession, right? And so you can anticipate that you're going to lose people you care a lot about, right? And I remember during Care to Load, my daughter, a few years ago, my daughter asked me, she said, Daddy, and we were just walking. It was after midnight during Care to Load, and she said, Daddy, are you sad? And I said, Yeah, I'm sad. I said, but I could be sad because I miss my friends, or I could be sad because I never knew such men. And I'd just rather be sad because I miss them. Like, you can choose your sad and you can choose your hard, and I choose this, right?
Absolutely. And that's, as you've known, you've been here since the beginning. I was really the first person I ever told about the 38 challenge, and that's our mission too. To carry on Matt's legacy and remember the man that he was, and utilize his legacy to inspire others. So Clint, why don't you go into a little bit of your time as a SEAL, kind of what brought you to become the second heaviest Navy SEAL of all time, if I can remember that correctly.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a bigger guy. But yeah, so I grew up. It's funny, during this coronavirus thing. There's not a lot to celebrate around COVID and Corona. There's not a lot of silver linings, but one of the small silver linings, just an unprecedented amount of time that I got to spend with my kids, with my family. And I get asked all the time when I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, like, hey, when do you want to be a Navy SEAL? I was like, and I honestly couldn't really point to this kind of genesis moment where it was like this, and then I wanted that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ever really remember not wanting to be one. And then I remembered my daughter came up to me, my oldest, and she said, hey, Dad, do you want to watch Magnum PI? I'm like, absolutely. Like, who doesn't want to watch Magnum PI? And she turned on the new one, and I'm like, oh, stop. We're not watching that. Like, that's not the real Magnum PI. I can't do it. So I took her back to 1980, and we started watching the original Magnum PI, which is an amazing show and actually pretty progressive as far as how it represented Vietnam veterans and some of the racial equity and the relationship that TC and Magnum is a pretty powerful show. But there was a scene in one of the earlier seasons where they kind of reveal that Thomas Magnum, the character, had played football at the United States Naval Academy and had become a Navy SEAL, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also had this hyper lucid memory of being a little chunky kid in Little Rock, Arkansas, watching Magnum PI on Thursdays at 8 with my dad. And I remember turning to look at my dad and saying, hey, Dad, I want to play football at Naval Academy and be a Navy SEAL. And my dad just kind of looked at me, he's like, all right. And that's where it started, right? And
Yeah.
so I never didn't have a plan. And there were things that kind of came, we all have these, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be in a rock band, like all this other stuff. But I never didn't have kind of a cardinal north. And then, and I wasn't very good at football. I mean, in eighth grade, I was a fifth string fullback at Brandenburg Middle School, and there were only three other fullbacks. I mean, they're skipping a whole position on the depth chart when they put me in.
Yeah.
But I love the game, and I love being a teammate. And I decided very early why I played. I wasn't gonna play because I was gonna become famous. I was playing because I wanted to learn what the game could teach me, and I wanted to be around these kind of people. And I want to be mentored by these coaches, and then I think my body kind of caught up with my desire, and then the game kind of made a lot of sense to me. Again, when I tell people I'm not gifted, there's not a lot of humility in that. There's just an observation of reality. And I do think my gift is not being gifted because I played every position on the football field as a scout team player, right? And so, scout team doesn't rotate. So, you're playing all these positions. And what was happening during my freshman and sophomore year in high school is I was amassing this institutional knowledge of the game. And I was cultivating empathy and awareness and intuition that would translate to speed my junior year. In my junior year, I came in halfway through the season and on the second half of the game, and all of a sudden the game made sense to me, right? So there's this perfect storm of opportunity and this unleashing of repetition and institutional knowledge that I had accrued over time without even knowing it. And then I just never really left the field after that, man. I just loved the game, played with a great high school program, had amazing coaches, amazing teammates. We were successful. My senior year, my father passed away. So when he was getting sick, it was during my senior season, and we used to have these pretty intentional conversations. And my father's father died when he was young, when he was 8. And so I don't think my dad had like a fatalism or anything like that, but I think he also knew that sometimes things didn't work out the way you wanted them to, right?
Yep.
I remember when I was getting recruited by all these schools, I went to see my dad in the hospital, and I'd just go up there and hang out with him. And I remember my dad, he sat me down and goes, hey, son, we got to talk about this. And he goes, hey, I'm fighting. Doctors are trying. There's no lack of effort and resolve to win this thing here. And I'll never forget this. He looked at me and goes, "Son, leaders talk about what they don't want to talk about. They say what they don't want to say. They do what they don't want to do. They plan for what they don't want to plan for, and they hear what they don't want to hear. And that's what makes them leaders, is the capacity to do those things." He goes, "We got to talk about what happens if I don't make it." And I'd always loved the Army Navy game. Remember, I had interviewed several years ago. I think it was ESPN magazine or CBS or something like that. They said, "Tell us, what do you think about the rivalry games?" And I said, "What do you think?" And they listed all these really wonderful rivalry games like Michigan, Ohio State, Texas A&M. Texas OU, just Auburn, Alabama. They just really, really. I love those games. Those are amazing games. I said, but Army Navy stands apart. And they go, "What do you mean?" And I told them, I said, you show me another game where everybody playing is willing to die for everybody watching, and I'll tell you that we have company. We stand apart, and I wanted to be a part of that. So I had an opportunity to go play at Annapolis. Went to prep school. Came down. Was had a different coaching staff. My freshman sophomore year, then my junior senior years when Charlie Weatherby and Tommy Ray and Dick Bumpus and Paul Johnson and Mike Prefer and all these amazing coaches kind of came in, and then we had Phil Emery, who was our strength coach, who I think was not only responsible for our success on the football field, but also for the success many football players had in leading men and women into harm's way afterwards. I mean, Phil was that Phil would help you see about yourself what you didn't know you had about yourself, right? So was part of a successful program at Annapolis. Very, very fortunate to be chosen for the SEAL community out of Annapolis. It's extremely competitive. I was one of 16 guys that were chosen out of quite a few more. And, guys like Mike McGreevy, who was on Red Wings, an amazing combat leader, came afterwards, but was really blessed to have that. But I also got picked up by the Ravens, and I remember being at camp at the Ravens and sitting there going like, man, the two things I told my dad I'd do to play in the NFL and be Navy SEAL. I'm sitting right here, and it became increasingly clear to me which one was the most important for me, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being in practice one day. One, I played the same position as Ray Lewis. So you got to be realistic when you're looking at it. Like, oh, man, I remember watching him in practice. Like, it might be easier to become a Navy SEAL than to beat out Ray Lewis because he was pretty good. And this is
not bad.
This is his second year, so he hadn't ascended into his Rayness yet. But man, you could tell he was committed to the craft. I mean, like he was one of the first guys I know that built a film room in his home. I mean, he was a real student of the game. Him and Ed Reed, and but I do remember sitting there and just realizing that everything I loved about the game was 10x in the military. And I remember watching this guy get hurt, which football's a violent game, it happens, right? But I was like, man, I got here, don't know how long I can stay here, don't know how good I can be, but I got here. And I have no idea if I can do this. And I got to go where I don't know. Like I wanted to serve, it's why I went to Navy. I recognized the honor that being selected for the SEAL teams was. And so for me, it was very easy to leave the NFL and go through training. So I left and went through training, started out with some amazing guys. I was class 217. We started out with more than 200 folks, and 12 of us made it all the way through. We had a graduating class, I think, 21. But 12 of us were kind of day one, week one. And man, I was just hanging in there. The level of talent that, I had around me, it was just stunning. And I think the reason I made it through training was I wasn't trying to make it through training. I was trying to keep up with these amazing men that I was in training with. And as a byproduct of keeping up with guys that were better, smarter, faster, stronger than me, I just kind of made it, right? And I think, life's a lot like that. I mean, you chase the right people and it'll take you to the right places, right? You've heard me say this a million times. You got to chase, pace, and pull.
Yep.
Chase the right people to the right places. Keep pace with people that are going to leave you behind if you don't put out. And pull someone behind you. Because if you don't, you're going to be doing this, whatever this is, longer than you want to, or longer than you're good at it. And both of those are a disservice to the this, right? Whatever it is.
Yep.
So checked into one of the SEAL teams after that, and this is in '99, pre 9/11. Had an opportunity to go back out to the Saints, so I went to the Saints for just a couple weeks, man, and I kind of remembered why I'd left in the first place, and I don't know if I'd have made the Saints or not. I don't know that I would have, but it didn't really matter because I just wanted to be back and running with the Lions, right? Try to
Mm-hmm.
keep up. So did multiple platoons in the teams pre and post 9/11, and then got out and starting companies. And you know, you tend to stay in touch with the places that built you. And I an amazing family, incredible coaches, a great community, but really, well, and I think the academy for me was just the place to be after I lost my dad.
Yep.
Because here's this big, strong, angry dude that could have gotten in a lot of trouble unless I'd gone to a place with a structure that the Naval Academy had. And you think you're going to do a bunch of stuff and you're a tough guy, and you got some small barrel-chested freedom-fighting Marine with his finger in your chest, and you're like, one, I think this guy wants to kill me, and two, he can't. Like he's capable.
Oh yeah.
Perhaps I will do what he says, right?
Absolutely.
And I needed that. I needed that structure, and that and staying close to the program has been incredibly important for me because I'm grateful for the program, and the program brings guys in my life that I get to stay connected with, and Matt was one of those, and that brought you and I into a friendship, and so yeah, so that's kind of the background of
Yeah.
me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, an extraordinary career, extraordinary man you are. Obviously, like we said, you're the first person I came and discussed the 38 challenge with, and our overall purpose, overall mission, and bring awareness to TBI, to CTE, to overall, the struggles that veterans and athletes alike, and everyday people face. So, Clint, if you don't mind, do you have a story that you can remember? I'm sure you have a couple. Not even football aside, because obviously the head trauma caused in football is, pretty relevant. But in your military career as a SEAL, do you have a story or two about a time you experienced a traumatic brain injury in the line?
Man, I think the era that I was growing up in both operational and athletically, you just weren't as mindful of those. Like this just kind of happened. You got your bell rung, right?
Yep.
Like on a ship, you're running, taking down a ship, and you don't lower enough, and ships are made of steel, and those hatches, or you ring your bell on one of those things, they go down. You're jumping out of a plane in a static line, you're hitting the ground about 22, 25 miles per hour, and if you don't fall right, you're going to get that whip. Obviously in football, you're going to take shots. I mean, the list goes on and on. And when you're breaching, when you're doing these things, you're getting you're experiencing concussive forces that are different than what most people think. If you're in a room and you're hitting a door with a charge, I mean, that blast was going to go somewhere, and so I think we were on the beginning edge of understanding how to mitigate those things with technology. I think it was just kind of a byproduct of what we did, and then what was interesting for me is as I kind of transitioned out and was dealing with some of the stuff that you deal with when you have kind of those head events. Imaging was beginning to catch up, like how you image your brain and how you understand what's going on. So the awareness was rising at the same time technology was beginning to meet the ability to better understand the byproduct of those kind of lifestyles, right? So, man, there's just so many of those kind of whip events. You jump off a boat into the water, you don't do it right, your head's gonna whip. Yeah, I mean it's hard to think of any just one.
One,
right?
yeah, no, absolutely. And you talked about, and we've talked about it a little bit, and not even just with side effects of TBI and head trauma, but just everything that a veteran faces, the struggles that come with mental health, and friends of yours taking their lives, and the loss of your father. So if you could go a little bit about some of the struggles that you've had mentally, if you're comfortable,
Yeah.
and then kind
One, I think mental health. I mean, I had a really great friend, one of the Latrell brothers. He said the final frontiers of human performance is really from the neck up. So when we started paying attention to the neck up performance, what you begin to understand is the beginning of all great performance is from the neck up, right? So if you're serious as a competitor, you're serious as an operator, mental health is fundamental. I mean, it is more relevant than any 40, any bench max, any vertical jump. I mean, having good mental health is the foundation of having physical health, which is then the foundation of the marriage of the two is what allows you to perform at a high level.
Absolutely.
And obviously, having been an athlete and been an operator, I was keenly aware of kind of the athletes and veterans are very much the same kind of person in a lot of ways. It's like lions and tigers. You know, they're both apex predators, and so when you're transitioning from those seasons of hyper clarity as far as who you are and what you do and why you matter to others, then you throw in this third element, which is whatever you want to call it, but it's a form of depression, right? And so I think fundamentally most people, or at least veterans and athletes, or I'll only speak for myself, you know, it's fairly simple. Did I count or did I cost on a daily basis, right? And so did I count or did I cost? And if somebody tries to be a good person, I want to count more than I cost, right? And so what the ball field and the battlefield gave me was these fairly fast feedback loop. Like you heard me say this before, right? There's four maps that matter. There's the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom, and the breakfast table.
Mm-hmm.
Ball field and the battlefield for me and many people were literal places, right? But now that I've transitioned from those things, the ball field is perform at a high level mentally and physically. The battlefield was a literal place. Now it's protect those whom God has entrusted me. The boardroom is provide for those whom God has entrusted to me. And the breakfast table is build and lead a family that loves me and that matters to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I began to realize is when I transitioned from the ball field and the battlefield, I didn't really have a map, right? And when you have a map, the worst you'll ever be is wrong, but you won't be lost.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe think about that. If you have a map, the worst you'll ever be is wrong, but you won't be lost. And I've been wrong and lost, and I hate them both, but I'll take wrong over lost any day.
Absolutely.
Because when you're wrong, you just figure out where you are, where you got to go, and what's going to take to get there. When you're lost, any direction can feel wrong. And when we transition from the ball field and the battlefield into these other seasons called the boardroom, what we lose is that feedback loop. And there's a physiology to this too. I mean, if you look at this as an athlete, I was able to self-assess value to my team every 25 seconds as a football player, right? And then I go to the sidelines and I get feedback from my position coach. And then at halftime, I get feedback from my coordinator. And at the end of the game, I get feedback from the score, the fans, the head coach, and the win or the loss, right? And so my brain is receiving data. And then on the battlefield is very much the same output, return on effort, right? And then when we transition away from those maps, what happens is we're broadcasting effort, but the feedback loop is different, right? And so it's almost like flying map of the earth, and all of a sudden you fly into a cloud bank and you don't have any instruments, so you don't know where you are. And so that for me, that induced a season of really deep confusion and deep uncertainty as far as who I was and how I mattered to others and how I could get better. And then you throw wanting to be someone who counts more than I cost, and then you throw the family on there, and so we have to pay attention to our mental health because of all these very realistic terrain changes that we're trying to deal with at the same time. And for me, man, I don't know that I did any of those things really well. You know, I was a proud guy that was the one that a lot of people would come to for help. So who does the person who people come to help go to for help, right? And then, you know, I just had this bad habit of when I lost my dad, you know, for me, when you don't hear that person tell you he's proud of you, you try to get 100,000 people tell you they're proud of you. And then when they do, and it doesn't really scratch the itch, it's scary, right? And so being vulnerable to the demographic that I probably needed in my life most, which is older men who kind of been where I was and had done what I was trying to do, I was slow to tap that vein of wisdom, and I've got the scars to bear because of that, right? And then you throw the identity stuff on that, and so man, it is incredibly important that we handle our mental health because life is hard. It's not supposed to be easy. I get nervous when life gets easy because it makes me feel like I'm missing something. Um, so we got to advantage ourselves, and just like we take care of our physical health, we have to recognize mental health as a metric that has to be measured and managed and built into because the consequence for not doing that can be irrecoverable, like with Matt, or hard to reconcile, like with my own family. As I, one of those places like you just want to stop feeling angry, so you drink something that makes you not feel angry for a little while, right?
Yep.
And then you're I'm not really a creature of restraint. Like moderation's not never really been a gift of mine, and the majority of the time that's a positive. But when you're self-medicating, or when you're lost, if you're lost and you're running faster, you're just getting more lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's exciting to me to see the attention that's being paid to the mental health pre-transition. One, while you're still performing, because it can prolong an operational or an athletic career when you steward the neck up as much as you do the neck down. And then two, certainly as you transition, begin to prep the landscape for that. Because but for my family and my faith and my friends, my story could be much, much different.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to dig into that a little bit deeper, and having that map, and I love that analogy. So what? Because we've talked about it before, and I'm very open about you know my struggles, and you and I have talked about them a lot too, and just seeking counsel, seeking, like you said, mentorship, advice from older people who have been through it, and just like overall being vulnerable. So what
Well,
are
you
some?
don't even have to. I mean, here's the thing. Like, Second Timothy says, don't be apologetic because you're young. Like, they don't have to be older. Like, you can be experienced and not have any experiences.
Absolutely.
You can be inexperienced and have tremendous experiences. Like, I've got friends where their first deployment to SEAL teams was full combat every day, right? And they had more combat in one deployment than a lot of people had in their entire career. So they're young, but they've been wizened by this urgency and this tempo and this intensity. So, it's not necessarily an age thing. And as a what I've learned to do is, like, I just go where the knowledge is, and I don't really care. I don't care if they're older, younger, men, women. If there's knowledge there, I want to glean it. Like, I want to learn from it, right? But availing yourself for the wisdom and experience of others, that's how you got good at anything else. So why wouldn't we do that in this thing called mental health and mental performance?
Absolutely. And the first step of that is just being vulnerable and being comfortable with seeking help, because in Matt's circumstance, he never really reached out and said, hey, I need help. And I think that that's one of the point of this podcast, is to make that in the light, and ending the stigma that it's not okay to reach out. And we've talked about just the idea of being okay with not being okay. It's a normal thing that everyone experiences.
Well, so the alternative is you're perfect, right? So if it's not okay to be not okay, then the only alternative is to be perfect, which is inachievable, right?
Yep.
So the only reality is to be okay, not being okay, and just to know that you don't have to stay not okay, right? And if we stay not okay, that's a choice, right? And inaction is an action. No choice is a choice, right? But we have to accept that not being okay is okay, because the alternative is the only right way is perfection. With what you and I believe, there's only one guy who got that right. The rest of us,
absolutely,
are not going to get it. So yeah, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay not okay. And what I love about this podcast on 38 Challenges is you can't tell someone that without giving them ways to get okay again, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what I love so much about the 38 Challenge and some of those things I try to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess when you started to believe that it was okay to to talk about your feelings and be vulnerable. What are some of those first steps that you took in that process and getting better and getting stronger mentally?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, what lit the fuse was a meaningfully significant failure on the home front. And you heard me tell the story, other people have heard me tell the story, but I just started the companies. My bride was at Bible study. My daughter was young at the time, and she had these night terrors, especially during thunderstorms, right? Side note, apparently, one, if it's your kids, it's not called babysitting, it's called parenting. My wife told me that.
Yeah.
One of the guys calls like King. I was like, "No, I'm babysitting." She hit me on the back of the head. She's like, "They're your kids. It's parenting when it's your kids. It's not babysitting." Like,
Yeah,
and
you're
then
not
she
getting
came
paid
up.
for it.
She came up with another thing as I was watching Twister with my daughters, which it's not. I mean, apparently it's not a kid show, and it may have done something to create this fear of storms in my children. So I'm the biggest problem in my family's life, right? But as a byproduct, my daughter had these night terrors, and when storms would happen, and she was young, and I was on the phone with a new client, a good friend, and it was late at night. And I was trying to work through a problem with him, and she would run into the room, and I'd tell him, "Hold on," I'd grab her and put her back in bed, kiss her, tell her I love her, right? And after a few rounds of this, I was kind of on this fairly intense part of the conversation, and she charged in the room again, and all I did was heard something, right? So when I just hear something, being hyper vigilant, you turn and you're kind of ready to handle the threat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was across the room; I wasn't close to her. But when I turned in kind of that fighting posture, it scared her. And I hate talking about this because I can see it in my mind's eye right now. And she blinked, she kind of froze up, and she started yelling, "It's me, it's me, it's me, it's me." And it just broke me. It just broke my heart because I'm supposed to be what she runs to when she's scared.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd scared her. And my friend, who's still a client, still a friend, he heard, he goes, "Hey, call me tomorrow, man. This is not a big deal." And he hung up on me. He didn't even give me a choice, right?
Yeah.
And I went and I scooped her up and I just held her and I just started rocking and I just broke. And this facade of having it all together just shattered, right? Where it mattered most to me, which is that breakfast table map, right?
Absolutely.
And my bride came home and she came to her room and I'm sitting down and I'm holding my daughter and she's patting the back of my head and trying and calming me down and my bride is like, "What happened? What happened?" And my daughter just she tried to take ownership. It's like, "It's my fault. I scared Dad." And my bride, she ripped my daughter out of my hands, and she was so mad, righteously angry. And she looked at me. She goes, "Fix this." And I did. Next morning, I walked into the Center for Brain Health down here at University of Texas Dallas Center for Brain Health, Brain Performance Institute, and they were having this kind of luncheon, this kind of meeting, and I just kind of hijacked the meeting. I started asking questions.
Yeah.
And then Sandy Chapman, who's the director, she said, "Hey, why don't you stay after this and let's talk?" And I just said, "Hey, whatever you got, I'm going to do because that's not going to happen again." And the other thing that happened for me is I left the teams and I got into a profession. It's a virtuous, worthy, and wonderful profession. Just wasn't for me. And I was very fortunate that I worked for some amazing guys: Gerald Prince, Dal Crocker, Robert Blackford, Robbie Berry. Companies called Morgan Keegan at the time. Now it's Raymond James. And these men just kind of protected me. And I remember I went to our church, Watermark Church, and I remember I met my daughter and she was 8 months old. When I came home, she was 8 months old, and becoming a dad was the scariest moment of my life. I mean, having not had a father, And she goes, "Hey, we're going to church at Watermark on Sunday." And I said, "Well, I don't want to go to Watermark." She goes, "Why?" I said, "Because that's where all the pretty people go." And she looked at me. She goes, "Well, your wife and your daughter are going to Watermark." I was like, "All right." And I'll go to Sunday. And it was one of those sermons where I was getting mad because I felt like she had told the pastor that I was coming.
Yeah.
So I felt like he was just talking to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, it was one of those ones where he's got you by the back of the head and he's just like wham, wham,
Yeah.
wham.
Been there.
And I was like, "Oh well, that hurt. So I should probably come back, right?" Yeah, I kind of have this habit of running at the hard stuff, right? And so one of the things I realized to back it up before that night with my daughter, I become aware of the fact that no matter what happened, I didn't feel like I was in the right spot, right? And I began to describe this to myself as I'm here, but I'm not home. And I still have the notepad that I wrote this down. As this thing called All the Way Home. How do I get all the way home? Because I'm just here, but I'm not home. And here's an X on a map. Home is knowing why we're here. And that's why so many of us can feel so much more at home over there on the side of a mountain, scared but surrounded by guys we love, doing something we're good at, right? Or you can be on a football field with 300-pound men trying to take you out, but it feels like home to you, right? And balancing a checkbook, doing your taxes, understanding how to close a business. I mean, those are scary, right? And I was a guy that had not really been was afraid a lot, because I could impose my will, my physicality, my toughness were gifts, but the boardroom didn't care about it. The boardroom didn't care about my physicality. Boardroom was a currency that I didn't understand, right? And that's where I kind of began to feel lost. And I remember I wrote this down. I said, I've got to come all the way home. And I'm a visual person. So I said, hey, my family's on the other side of this door. That's home, and I'm only here. I'm on this side of the door. So how do I get through that door? And so the way we do it in the military is we blow it up. C4. C4 is amazing. It's fantastic. But for me, C4 became like an acrostic or an acronym, whatever you call it. And it stood for career, compete, contribute, and have a catalyst. Because what I realized was in my early 30s, my career was competing, contributing, and having a catalyst. And every day, my profession was competing against other athletes and other teams or the adversaries of our nation. My profession was a form of service. I was in uniform military service. I was contributing, right? And then the expectation was I got better every day. So what happened was I was burdening this profession on the boardroom with producing the satisfaction only all four of those things can do. So I finally split them up. And I've got about a year of a daily planner where it just says C, 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 C.
Yeah.
And it's 1 or 0, 1 or 0, 1. I think I even showed it to you. But that's how I began to measure the day, because until I was in my early 30s, I knew how to measure the day. Mm-hmm. As an athlete, I measured the day. As an operator, I knew how to measure the day. As a business person, I didn't know how to measure the day. So I was in that fog bank with no instrument panel. So I just made an instrument panel. I just gave myself a language that I could respond to, right? So that's when I began to recognize the difference between being lost and being wrong. Because I kind of began to see my life as being on a map again. And I could kind of tell where I was wrong. And I hated being wrong, but I wasn't feeling as lost. And then that night with my daughter and my bride, and that next morning I was like, all right, I'm wrong. I'm lost. How do I go from lost to wrong? And then how do I go from wrong to right? Mm-hmm. And that's really, carry the load. I'd start to carry the load. And so I began to check that box. I did my job. I was competing and training to compete again. I was serving others with carry the load. I was getting better. So I was surrounding myself with guys who were going to leave me behind if I didn't put out. And then the final thing for me was finding the gym for the brain. Like what's the brain's equivalent of a squat rack and a deadlift. And at the Brain Performance Institute and the Center for Brain Health over here at University of Texas Dallas is where I found this kind of like this play. You ever walk as an athlete? You're an athlete, right? You walk into this gym. There's certain gyms you walk into and you just instantly know. You're like a kid in a candy shop. You're like, oh man, I could get
I'm gonna have some fun here. Yeah.
Better here. Like, I can do this. I can do this. You can innovate. And there's like a sand pit over there, and there's kettlebells, and there's like all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Brain Performance Institute and the Center for Brain Health began for me. Is I was like, man, a prime driver in my performance to date was an untrained mental strength, right? So imagine what happens when that mental strength now becomes trained. Yep. And becomes available. And as we image the brain better, we understand how to do that more, right? And I never had a stigma. And when you begin to look at TBI as what it is, which is an injury. Yep. Right? I never felt weak when I sprained my ankle. I felt injured when I sprained my ankle. And it really wasn't until I saw my functional MRI, I was like, oh, I'm injured. I'm not weak. I'm not dumb.
Absolutely.
I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm not dumb, right? And I felt weak and dumb and undisciplined and lazy and all these other things. And And if you injured your ankle and you began to measure yourself by the same currency pre-injury as post-injury, you would feel lazy because you weren't practicing. Well, no, you're not lazy. Your ankle's hurt, right? So it took that visual imagery of the injury for me to go, oh, okay, I've been injured before. Like I know how to do this, right? And that's what it's kind of exciting. It's incredibly scary to begin to image that performance system that you've never fully understood because you're going to see things that you've never seen before, and that can be scary. But alternatively, as imagery grows, the science of performance grows as well. So there's never been more ways to increase brain performance. And what we're beginning to understand is of all the performance systems in the human machine, the brain is the most exciting for its
Yep.
capacity to recover, its ability to compensate. I mean, it's incredible all that the brain can do
Yep.
with when you make it available. Like, think about as good an athlete as you could be on your own. There's an amazing guy. He just passed away, and I loved him dearly. And the world's going to miss him increasingly as they look back on all he's done. He was named Bob Ward. And Bob Ward was the strength coach of the Cowboys from like 1976 to 1991. And he was really one of the fathers of science-based training. I mean, the innovations he brought all the hand skills into the NFL. Just his impact on sports human performance is, I mean, he probably one of the top 10 most influential people in strength and conditioning and human performance. He just passed away, and I loved him, and he mentored me, and it was amazing to me to just see this. And he was a Marine, and I grew up with my bride's a dad. And when you think you're a pretty good athlete, and I see this happen over at TCU all the time. I mean, I remember great athletes coming in playing a certain position, and then Dick Bumpus, who was a legendary assistant head coach there, and Gary Patterson going, if you play this, you're going to be pretty good. If you trust us and you move to this position, you'll be in the NFL for 15 years, probably a Hall of Famer. And when you trust someone who knows more about it than you do,
Yep.
and you submit yourself to their skill and experience, what you can do is pretty incredible. Like Donnie over there at TCU, like who's going to write the program, him or you? And if you're writing it, you're going to be the best you can be. If he writes it, you're going to be as good as he thinks you can be with his 30 years of all this other stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's what's starting to happen on the mental performance side. It is unbelievable the capacity for improved performance. Amazing guy named Eric Potterat. Potterat was the force psychologist in the SEAL teams. And I remember asking him one time, I said, hey, what was it like to be the force psychologist in the SEAL teams? He goes, Clint, he goes, it was like being a zookeeper at a zoo with nothing but carnivores. Like there's no giraffe, there's like lion, tiger, gorilla, shark, like nothing.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to watch how much better he made us because he understood how the performance system worked. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you really look at human performance, as I understand it, and I'm not a medical professional in the least, I'm the lowest ranking Naval Academy graduate to ever get a SEAL billet, and they told me I had more personal fouls than anyone in Navy football history. I'm pretty proud of that, honestly.
Yeah.
And but 2/3 of performance is a machine. It's the body and the brain, and the body and the brain are going to do what the body and the brain are going to do. And you cultivate a mind that can impose its will on the body and the brain. But when you recognize that the body and the brain are machines, and you look at them as machines, then inviting and you don't feel weak when you ask the IT guy to come fix your computer.
Yep.
And you don't feel dumb when you ask the mechanic to fix your car. But when we begin to look at our body and our brain as machines that we're authors of, inviting people into the maintenance and improvement of those systems becomes easier to conceptualize. And, you know, that's what's so exciting now is to, you know, you got to ask yourself, hey, do I want to perform at a high level or don't I? And if you don't, then keep doing what you're doing. And if you do, you go find someone who knows more about it than you do, and you put yourself at the mercy of their genius, and you just go. And when you begin to look at it, like I don't call it treatment, I call it training, right? Because training is a assumptive of treatment. Like, I got to get better so then I can get stronger and faster.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I was at Center for Brain Health, I was like, hey, I'm so insecure. Will you call this mental performance training instead of treatment? Because if you call it treatment, I'm not going to come.
Yeah.
If you call it training, I'll come. And Santa's like, really? I'm like, oh yeah, don't underestimate the depths of my insecurity. right? If you call it treatment, if you call it training, I'm showing up. You call me
Yeah.
treatment. You need treatment. I don't need treatment. You're stupid, right? And
Hmm.
that's just where I was, right?
Yeah.
So whatever words you got to tell yourself to get where you're supposed to be, if being the person you said you want to be is important enough, you'll do it.
Absolutely. And such an important point to note. Like, you're in TBIs and CTE and mental health in general. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're
You're untrained.
crazy.
All
Yeah.
it is you're untrained. It's like I love this. There's a movie called Man on Fire. It's a great movie, and there's a scene in it where Denzel Washington plays a character named John Creasy, and he's training this girl, to become better at swimming. And she goes, and she takes all the lessons on board. And so what was happening is the starter pistol was startling her, and she would take off from the block slower. So he
Hmm.
kind of inoculated her to the starter pistol so she could take off more efficiently and then swim her time. And there's a scene where she goes, she kind of accomplishes it, and she goes, "I'm tough." And he looked at her and goes, "There is no tough. There's trained or untrained, right?" And so a lot of times when you're seeing people who are mentally tough, it's because they had access to insight and training, and whether that was formal or that was informal. I just came down from Arkansas, my family reunion. My uncle JC's 90 years old, and he was my father's gold standard. And when my father passed away, he became my gold standard. And I've yet to meet a person that can work as hard as my uncle JC. No formal medical training, but the country wisdom that he's amassed over 70 years uh, of farming and ranching. Man, I was so well trained. I was just, like, yeah, he used to tell me one thing that if you can only afford one tank of gas, don't get lost, right?
Yep.
Like, how profound is that? It's like, hey, know your stuff, plan your dive your plan. You don't have a lot of margin for error, right? And and so anybody that you see who's mentally tough, recognize that that's a byproduct of exposure to either expert training or life seasoned expert training, and that knowledge is available for you as well, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Why would
And
you be good at something you never learned, right?
yeah.
We hold ourselves, if I'm not instantly fluid in another language, I don't vilify myself for not being fluent in that language. Yet when I'm not instantly expert in brain performance, I vilify myself for not already knowing how to do that. And it's nonsensical, it's illogical, right? But what's so neat is that mental performance and that recovery and that treatment is so available now and it's so abundant. So there's really no excuses.
Yep. And the first step is reaching out for help, because a
Hey, I
lot
want
of
to get better.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah, I
want
want to
I
get
want
better.
to be trained, and
However you want to say yourself. If you don't want to say I want to fix myself, just say I want to get better. I want training. I don't need treatment. I want training.
yep.
However you got to talk to yourself, because that's what I did. It's like I don't need treatment. I need training, right? And
Abs-
and it's the same thing.
Absolutely. And the resources and what we're doing, and thank God that they're starting to become more prevalent for, like you said, a screening for your brain that you can visually see, like you can see in an X-ray. Oh, my arm is 100% broken. I need a
Yeah,
cast. I need to do training, or I need to do therapy. I need to do training. Everything. It's the exact same with your brain, and when that's why we need these resources to be in society, because
you see that tibial fracture?
yeah.
You're not a bad person. That's a broken bone,
Yep, and
right?
it's the same. It's what athletes do to serve others, to perform. It's what veterans do to put their lives on the line. Which is why that there's an injury in your brain. It's not because of, it's not because you're weak or because you did anything. It's because of the sacrifice that you made for your team,
Yeah.
for this country.
I mean, how you typically if you look at TBI and stuff like that, the injuries we mass in TBI were in the service to others. Like they're virtuous scars, right?
Yep.
And I think if we gave ourselves the grace that we give other people, and we held ourselves to the standard we hold other people, we find ourselves finding mental treatment training a lot more aggressively. Like if you had a teammate that was injured and he wasn't trying to get better to get on the field, you question his desire to be a great teammate, right? Like
Absolutely.
the dudes who avoid the training room, they don't. They're jeopardizing, the, the goals that we said we had, right? And so, um, when you can flip the switch and look at it as training, and for me, it almost was that simple. I had to convince myself that this was training so I could perform at a high level, so I could get to this X on a map that I said, more than it was treatment. The reality was it was treatment, right?
Yep.
But if I told myself it was training, I would go. If I told myself it was treatment, and that's just the insecurity that I had at the time. But at the end of the day, I wanted to, I had to kind of pit these fears against each other. The fear of finding out I was broken, or the fear of underperforming as a husband and a daddy. Boy, you put those two against each other, like this loses every time. I'm much more afraid of not being a good husband and a daddy than I am of figuring out what's wrong with me, right? So when I match these fears against each other, this one loses, and I go get training, right?
Absolutely. And I think an important thing to note, and as we've been touching on, is there's so much training out there, and I know from you personally, Clint, and myself, if there's anyone out there listening that resonates with Clint's message, and I need to be trained, I need to be better, because I know that if I showed my brother a CAT scan or a scan of his brain, I said, listen, man, because of what you've done athletically and because of how you've served others your whole life, this is your brain's injured, and similarly to the disc that you blew in your back, it's going to need medical help. It's medical training. However you want to look at it, it's all and that's
an ice pack for the brain, right? I mean, that's what it is. Rest, ice, elevate. Was it rest, ice, compression, elevation? I think that's what it was, right? What's the mental version of that, right? And I think once we begin to look at things through the lens of performance, and we recognize that injury limits our performance, but we want to perform at a high level, then you just take on injury, because it's more about performing at a high level than it is addressing the pain that you're in right now. Right?
Absolutely.
At least for me, and it is incredibly. I mean, some of there's a great friend of mine. He's a wonderful Navy SEAL, John McCaskill. He has these amazing mindset and mindfulness stuff on LinkedIn. I mean, boy, there's just so many different things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is I did a couple of deployments to the east, to the Asia area, and looking at in the great warrior cultures, mindfulness and meditation were sacrosanct. Like, if you didn't do those things, you weren't a warrior, right?
Yep.
So I had exposure to the performance relevance of that kind of stuff. So the knowledge and the proof is really at your fingertips, right? And there's so many apps, like the Calm app that LeBron does, and there's just so many out there, right? Just do something. Just do one thing different today than you did yesterday, right? And
Absolutely.
It's really just do one thing. Make one phone call. Take 5 minutes. And look at it through the lens of performance vice pain management.
Absolutely. And I like just taking that first step. And the first step is realizing that, hey, something's going on inside my brain, and the stigma that needs to be broken is that is okay. That is 100% fine, that you are not okay. Step 2, taking an action and how to better your brain, how to better your family.
Just one thing.
Exactly.
Just do one thing. Just listen to one podcast. The Huberman Lab. He's Andrew Huberman at Huberman Lab at Stanford. There's an amazing podcast led by a dear friend of mine named Coleman Ruiz and Preston Klein. If you go to Mission Critical Team Institute, some of the stuff they're talking about there is just mind blowing, right? But listen to one thing, do one thing, call one person. We're serious about performance, we do those things, right? And life is performance.
Absolutely. And I look forward to conversations like this, and so many other efforts out there to bring these technologies and this availability for help into the light, so that anyone can go and they can get the treatment and say, this is what your brain looks like, this is what we need to do to get it better, let's do something about it.
And that's what I love about the concussion. That's what I love about the beneficiary of the 38 challenges year is the concussion legacy, and like, hey, how do we better understand these and better recover these things so we continue to perform at a really high level on these maps that matter to us, right?
Absolutely.
For the listeners here, man, I would tell you, just the map doesn't have to be right. It just is a map. I had this conversation with a great young guy, and we were talking about the breakfast table map. And I said, well, you're born into a breakfast table, then you build a breakfast table. And he's like, man, I'd really love to get married. I said, all right, well, here's your map. Because the map has borders. I said, this could be totally wrong for the purposes of this conversation. You want to be married in 3 years and be a dad in 5. Okay, what are the borders? Don't meet your spouse at a bar late on Saturday night. Don't meet your spouse on a bar late on Friday night. Hope she's not a serial killer. Want her to love Jesus. There's now you're on a map,
Yep.
so. But now you're on a map, and things get revealed in progress, right? But build a map. Hey, and like for me, it's like the real trigger for me is like, hey, I wasn't gonna do that. I set a border, and the border of my map was that's not gonna happen again. I'm never gonna be more scary to my daughters than the thing they're scared of. Like that's so I set my back border right there. That wasn't gonna happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some things I was unwilling to do to get better, and things I wasn't gonna do any better. I wasn't gonna do this to get better. I wasn't gonna do this to feel better. So now I got these 2 maps. And then I've got this horizon map that changes over time, but I'm not lost anymore. I'm still wrong, man. I'm discouragingly wrong so often, but I'm not lost.
Absolutely.
And the difference between being wrong and lost is the difference between a hard day and a bad day. You can take a lot of hard days. You can't take a lot of bad ones. And if you're lost, it's a bad day. And if you're wrong, it's just a hard one.
Yep.
So only hard days.
Absolutely. And Clint, this will not be our last conversation. A man with endless wisdom in yourself, and
it's endless.
Yeah,
it's
it's ever growing.
There's a lot of returns that sets in maybe a little bit further than this. But
it's ever growing though, and I know that our conversation today will help. So if you take a few things away from this, take that first step. Reach out to myself. Reach out to Clint. Reach out to somebody. And
Google mental performance and just pick something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, pick one thing to do and to get better at today, and we will see. I think Clint. We're hoping that Clint can come down to the August 8th event. It's looking like he might be able to say a few words and you be able to meet him there, hopefully. So.
Hey, one last thing, real quick. And I think it's important, and it goes back to it's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people this all the time. Fear the unscarred man. Fear the unscarred man.
Yep.
Because he's either lying or he's never dared.
Yep.
And both of those are dangerous. Our scars make us. We're all broken. Trying to remember who said this is a fantastic quote. We're all broken, and most of us are better at the broken places. And I'll get attribution of that later because it's a powerful quote. But if you're not broken, then you're lying, right? You're perfect or you're a liar.
Yep.
So just be broken and get better, man.
Absolutely. And just a quick thought on that. I have a scar on my ACL, and most people who know me know that I have it because I show it off. This is because I did a sport.
Chicks do scars, man.
Yeah, chicks take these scars, and everyone has mental scars, like you're saying. So don't be afraid to show them and to wear them with pride, because that's how you get stronger.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm proud of you, man. I know Matt would be proud of this. We just ran out of time with Matt, and it's a worthwhile mission to help people find more time to get to who they said they wanted to be, where they said they wanted to be.
Absolutely.
So I'm proud of you. I'm excited for this. I love the 38 challenge. Love what you're doing, and hey, hold fast, stay true, and excited for you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, bro. I love you. This won't be the last time you guys hear from Clint Bruce. Always thank you for your time, brother.
Yeah, man. Talk to you soon.
See ya. Bye-bye.